legislative agenda update, Ms. Spillman and Ms. Walker.
Good afternoon and welcome. The General Assembly is not in session, so it's probably true, I hope. So you have a breather.
We believe that to be true. Well, good afternoon. We're glad to be here, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Casey. Also, just want to give recognition to Mr. Smith here, who's joining us from schools. Been a great partner as we continue to work and talk about legislative topics that are important to both the county and schools. And so this afternoon, we're excited to walk through just a little bit of a backdrop heading into this next session, review the proposed draft program that you all will hopefully adopt in September. And then Casey Walker here is going to provide just an update on some other advocacy and outreach efforts that we're working on. And then we'll close with our calendar. So just want to highlight a few items, kind of setting the stage as we're going into this 2025 General Assembly session that will start in January. Got a nice reminder from our registrar this afternoon about the number of elections we deal with. And so in Virginia, we are special in that every year is an election year. And next year is no shortage of that, with 100 seats in the House of Delegates up for re-election, the governor's position, attorney general position, and lieutenant governor. So there's a lot at stake. Definitely lends itself to different perspectives and initiatives that we may see coming out in this next session. There were 405 bills continued from the last session, so we have taken a look at those and expect to see that there will be a return in some form or fashion. In particular, this summer, there's been a variety of commission meetings that we've been attending, and this is where a lot of the bills were pushed into study, and so through that process, they're being fleshed out to whether they're going to come back in some form or if we will, and what that might look like. So the Housing Commission was examining a variety of bills related to accessory dwelling units, the use of religious properties for residential purposes, landlord-tenant topics, streamlining the plan review process, evaluating different financing and tax incentives for affordable housing. And so some of that work is coming near completion. We've yet to see exactly what those details will look like for potential language in bills, but we're keeping a close look at that as it's developing. Last session, there was a comprehensive bill that was introduced to address the use of artificial intelligence on public bodies, and that was sent to study this summer. And so our folks here in our IST department were integral in helping to get information out to General Assembly members that really, I think, prompted it to go into study further, because there were a variety of issues why this was overly problematic, but primarily it would have established some new unfunded mandates, quite frankly, that were very costly. So JCOTS, the commission, it's the Joint Commission on Technology and Science, was directed to analyze the use of AI in public bodies, and they will have a report out that's due by December 1st. So that commission's meeting next week. Hopefully we'll gain some more insight into what that language could look like and ultimately what that will look like going into the next session. K-12 funding continues to be a hot topic, predominantly as the JLARC report was coming out last year, continues as we are looking at this joint subcommittee on secondary and elementary education. They're diving into those report recommendations, and it looks like they're primarily going to focus on the SOQ funding methodologies. And so that subcommittee is set to meet on September 16th. Ahead of that meeting, we're talking with our schools partners, VML, VACO, our delegation, just helping to remind them that there's still a significant hole to fill before we even start deciding whether or not we're going to change this formula. And so what, first and foremost, are they going to be doing to address that issue? And then secondly, once they start working on recommendations for changing the formula, we need to see that locality-specific data, because whether or not we can implement some of these changes is going to be effective how it's going to impact us here locally to truly evaluate it. So those meetings, there's a few of them planned over the next few months, and then November 1st is the deadline for their report. Just want to make mention of one more report. So as you may recall, last year, well actually this year, when they adopted the biennium budget, there was money identified for MedFlight in the current year, but then for the second year, there was language added directing the State Office of Emergency Medical Services to deliver a report to the chairs of the money committees by October 1st. And that report is expected to describe the planned cost allocation that would give funding through the Trauma Center Fund. So we're just keeping a tight pulse on this topic and seeing how it develops. About 2 weeks ago, I have shared some information with you on this front. The governor provided remarks on really kind of setting the stage for the upcoming fall budget development process for the state. And following that, there was comments from our Secretary of Finance, and the state's in a position, as it's forecasted right now, for $1.2 billion surplus. However, they also shared most of those monies have been already committed to previously identified priorities. That includes the I-81 improvements, WQIF deposits, Revenue Reserve Fund, and then the VIMS debt program. So that said, they believe there's about an unrestricted balance of around $157 million available. So that's not a lot of money when it comes to all of the other competing priorities that exist out there still. And so the governor did not explicitly provide this in his comments, but did strongly communicate reducing taxes across the Commonwealth. And so there were some other comments made, I think, to some members of the press outside of the room about indications towards eliminating the car tax. The governor's proposed budget will come out on December 18th, and I think that that's where we're going to really be seeing those details. But immediately following that money committee meeting, there was a joint tax policy subcommittee meeting, and that has been established since 2022, but I believe this is just the second time they've met since it was first established. And so looking at the tax policy revisions for what they could introduce across the Commonwealth, a variety of presentations came out of that committee, but the chair of the subcommittee, Senator Lucas, offered opening comments that I think set the stage really to how are we going to modernize the state's sale and use tax, looking at the digital services. So as you recall, this topic came up last year. Nothing came to fruition, but I expect that we may see a governor's proposed budget in December with some changes to tax policy, and likely anticipate additional changes once the General Assembly is back in session and their proposed changes. In closing, really on this piece of it, the House of Delegates is going into session with a 15 bill limit, and the Senate is a 20 bill limit, exclusive of whatever commission bills there may be. So really diving in, that's a lot that's set in the backdrop heading into this next session. And Chesterfield has demonstrated a lot of success with the way that we've adopted this program in the past, and I'm recommending that you consider, keeping the same format in place. And so with that, we have Chesterfield's guiding principles, I believe, really offer a great base and foundation for offering that strategic direction. When topics are presented, it gives us the ability to be most flexible and adaptable, reacting quickly when legislation gets presented, and provides, again, that strategic direction to the program. So as we've done in the past, proposing that these guiding principles are adopted with the program, and I'll just run through them very quickly: providing quality education and public safety, promote quality of life to enrich our community, preserving the local autonomy, and supporting Blueprint Chesterfield's strategic framework. So reviewing legislation and budget proposals, we look at it through a variety of lenses, but having these guiding principles really provides us with that strategic direction to make those reactions very quickly. Getting into the legislative priorities, and so the last couple of years we've expanded some of these legislative priorities and been a little bit more specific about the positions that we take on them. And so asking that again, as you all are reviewing the proposed program, and you have a sheet in front of you that walks through some of the positions on here, that this be part of the, recommend this for approval as well. So for K-12 education, support implementing the JLARC K-12 education funding recommendations, and with that, fully supporting funding all state mandates, fully eliminating the support cap and modernizing staffing standards and those associated fundings, supported expanded flexibility for teaching certifications for non-traditional path, working with a focus on those individuals with professional work experience that are looking to take a career change for teaching, supporting educational support programs to match the skills needed for our local workforce opportunities now and into the future, and then support the option to expand local permissibility for school capital maintenance and construction funding. Again, as you may recall from this last session, there was a bill which had pretty broad bipartisan support to add a 1% local option to sales tax for localities that would have been a dedicated revenue source for school construction. Ultimately, the bill was not signed by the governor's office, but in the conversations that we've been having, fully expect to see this language return this session. And I think that, looking for your continued support on this option as well. In public safety, continue to advocate for the state to honor its funding commitments, specifically for 599 funding for our police. Support the use of technology to enhance community and public safety and security. Support for improved safety and security measures at Riverside Regional Jail and strengthening operational oversight and accountability within the local authority space, opposing limitations or caps on our local land use authority, opposing elimination or limitations or caps on our ability to maintain local revenues, supporting the option to offer enhanced VRS benefits to other critical public safety workers. This is the 911 dispatchers, our juvenile detention officers, and animal service officers. Again, as you recall, there was a JLARC report that was done on this specific topic, which supported funding in these areas, and so it seems to be that there's a big hang-up at the state on their positions and not wanting, to create an inequity, but we would argue we need to have this ability to offer this flexibility for our folks. And then supporting another option to offer flexibility in the public notice requirements. Within infrastructure, support the ongoing viable sources to replace the lost revenues for transportation funding that came out of the grocery sales tax. There was a 0.5% that was eliminated there, and that has yet to be replaced. Support funding for secondary road maintenance on VDOT maintained rights-of-way. Opposing state-mandated exemptions on local sales tax. Support funding for the Fall Line Trail, particularly our southern section priority. Support and prioritize the project and funding for Powhite Parkway extension. To address unfunded mandates and these cost shifts, these are the local yet state responsible services, supporting a comprehensive analysis to modernize staffing standards and state's share of the market-based salaries across all constitutional offices for those county employees, support market-based salaries for all state workers in Chesterfield. That includes the general district clerks, the public defender's office, the health department, and then continuing to oppose unfunded state mandates. For economic development, supporting site readiness initiatives, including infrastructure funding and streamlining application and permitting processes to promote major economic development opportunities, supporting programs and funding for business growth, new business development, and continued business investment, and supporting programs and funding that invest in tourism and entertainment. In technology, we're recommending to support policy and funding to advance cybersecurity protections and risk mitigation measures across the Commonwealth. Within housing, supporting for additional state funding and resources that would bolster local housing options. And then in human services, to help support additional funding and programmatic resources to address health, well-being, and recovery services, which would include our mental health and behavioral health system resources. So again, adopting these legislative priorities really provides us this framework for how we review and evaluate proposed legislation as it impacts our Chesterfield community, our operations here locally. At this point, I'm just going to open it up. We have more to the presentation, but that was a lot of information.
Yeah. Any questions at this point or comments you want to make? Yes, Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question around when a particular bill initiative gets presented, and we don't agree with it. How does that get communicated to us? I'm kind of confused about that process where it's like, whoa, this is not something we're going to agree with.
So as our job and effort as we are down there at the General Assembly, when the bill does not align with the program that you all as the board have adopted, we're seeking out the members who either, are carrying the bill, it's going to be the members who are carrying the bill, the members of our delegation, informing those individuals, trying to understand. The question's always like, why? Why did we get here? How do we get here? Why do we have this bill in front of us? And then if opposition's truly needed, then we're going to go out and communicate that to the masses as far as how and why this, and provide the impact to Chesterfield. I think that, it's often also not Chesterfield in isolation, but we work very closely with our partners at VACO, at VML. We have other legislative counterparts across the state that do similar work to what Casey and I are doing down there as well. So it's I think a multi-force effort when opposition is warranted against a particular bill or topic.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Snyder.
Maybe I'm just not seeing it. I know we had talked about the refusing development if there isn't infrastructure to support it. I thought we talked about that. Is that in there somewhere? I know that was presented at some point, yes?
Loosely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So as part of our infrastructure, within the infrastructure space, and then our housing options as well.
Thank Mr. Carroll.
Mr. Chair, I think the simplest question is, last year, Delegate Mark Early carried that legislation, and Senator Glenn Studeman carried legislation. Are we going to inquire with them or anyone else from our legislative delegation from Chesterfield to see if they will be carrying that same type of legislation again?
Yes, so we're in the process of meeting with all of the members of our delegation right now through the next month, and so all of that information will come out, and you'll get a summary if there's anything of importance to share based on the information that they'll share with us that they're carrying.
Mr. Engel.
I understand we didn't say that specifically, but under local authority, that's part of the big picture of making sure that the locality has the authority to make decisions for the locality. So we do have it covered
Absolutely.
in that point, but you're right, Ms. Snyder, we do need to focus on that.
All right, Dr. Miller.
I did just kind of add to that is some sort of a sunset clause when it comes to a decision. There has been the possibility of development in places and been in place since the 1980s. And it's really hard I would love to see where there's a 25-year sunset clause or something that if the developer doesn't move forward with it, then it reverts back to a previous. I'm not sure if that is an option, but I'd like to see something to put more control locally on that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
Unfortunately, for existing zoning, you're not going to be able to do anything. However, we actually asked for this years ago, and it went nowhere. It's nothing hurts with asking for it again. But, part of what you could look at and what you're asking about is to look at a parcel if something is zoned and say, if it's not developed within 10 years, for example, and everything else develops around it, does it have to come back before reconsideration before it can move forward, either through the Planning Commission process or through the General Assembly process? I mean, not General Assembly process, the Board of Supervisors process. I'll give you an example. The landfill out in the western part of Hull Street, that was a 1984, I think, zoning case. And then it came back. But in the meantime, between 1984 and now, we had Mag Green and a bunch of other developments come out of the ground, but there was no way to undo that zoning. And so if we had something in place that said after 10 years, if you don't do it, it's going to be subject to this. The thing you have to be careful of with that is it will spur growth. If someone gets something, if someone's put on a timetable and said you have X amount of years to do it, it will spur a lot of growth to come out quicker out of the ground than currently because they are put on a clock. And so it's one of the things you got to look at in that.
Very good, yeah.
To your point, though, if you know that it's coming because they're going to be on a clock, you can plan for it better. When you have no idea it's coming in 6 years, you can't plan for it. And the county cannot respond to something that has zoning, but we don't know about it, and all of a sudden it comes out of the ground like wildfire. We can't plan for that. So there's pluses and negatives to all of it, but we do need to keep in mind, and I think all of that, again, goes back to local authority.
Mr. Minks, you can comment.
The General Assembly actually, since the economic downturn, I think it started in 2008 or 10 in that vicinity, but the General Assembly has been affirmatively extending the time that developments can wait to develop, and every General Assembly pushes it out a few more years. We have been trying to see if we could stop that movement, and the movement has actually been in the other direction up to now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, other comments, questions? You may proceed. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Walker at this point.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to provide you all with a quick update on a few federal and state grant opportunities that we are currently pursuing. So the Virginia state budget approved this year includes $20 million to support improvements at historic sites in Virginia in preparation for the 250th anniversary. You all are welcome to try pronouncing that word. Of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. This program is geared towards boosting visitation at the state's historic sites, and it's not limited to those that are connected to the Revolution. It's just any historic site in Virginia is eligible. So the process begins with a pre-application phase that closes this Friday, and we are working with the Parks Department right now to put forward a couple of Chesterfield's historic sites for consideration at this phase. So the state will then determine which projects are eligible through that pre-application phase and invite those projects to apply later on this fall. So that's one state program we're actively pursuing. In addition, at the federal level, we are working with the Transportation Department to resubmit our application for the Reconnecting Communities grant program. So this ask is just over $1 million in planning funds to identify multimodal design improvements along Route 360 and modifications to the Route 150 and 360 interchange to make that corridor safer and more accessible for pedestrians and bicyclists. So that application will be submitted at the end of September and we'll likely hear early next year. So these are just two examples of the type of advocacy work that we're doing year-round to pursue grant opportunities at the state and federal level. And one other opportunity at the federal level, ARPA. So just about a month ago, we submitted the second quarter 2024 quarterly expenditure report and our annual recovery plan that's required by federal guidelines. Both of those reports included the spending plan based on the table in this slide. So this is a summary of the federal dollars that are applied to each of these projects. We're keeping a closer eye on these projects as we approach the end of this year, as the obligation deadline for these funds is the end of this calendar year. So in light of that, we anticipate bringing a final public hearing before you all to kind of serve as a final cleanup of these funds, including allocating the balance and the contingency funds, as well as looking at anything that may be over or under to make sure we fully expend the federal dollars by the deadline. So as always, more to come on this topic, but that's your ARPA update for now. Things remain on track.
All right, well, it's been a busy summer, and it's just continuing to amplify as we get closer to the end of the year. So just been into the heat of building this next 2025 session. Started with conversations with you all. We've been in conversations with county leadership and meeting with our state and federal officials. And so then we'll be back in front of you in September to hopefully adopt the legislative program. October and November are pretty packed with meetings across the state between VML and VACO, governors' conferences, and the different money committees are going to be meeting through their retreats. On December the 3rd, we're going to be partnering with schools to jointly host a legislative breakfast with all of the members of the Chesterfield delegation, very similar format to from last year, and so more to come on those details. The governor will be presenting his proposed budget on December 18th, and then the short 45-day 2025 General Assembly session starts on January the 8th. So just want to thank you all for your continued support and guidance and your availability as you are when topics get presented and ability to quickly respond to us too. So appreciate all you do for us.
Well, thank you both for being here and for keeping us up to date on everything going on, and hopefully continue to keep us surprised on what they're doing with the state income tax system. I know that's something that's being considered by committees, and also it's my hope that they'll enhance funding for secondary roads in Chesterfield County. When you have $1 billion at the state level, you know, you got to share it appropriately. When you took it away years ago, what we learned, and so we need to look at that very closely, but remind them of those things. And also, we appreciate your keeping us up to date with regard to our delegation. I think that's so very important that they don't file bills that impact us. We learned in Crater the other night, Dr. Casey and I did, that one of their senators had filed a bill and had even consulted the localities southern to us. And so that can be a concern. So we got to continue to work together closely so that we don't have to fight our own people, or at least challenge our own people with regard to legislation. And I was startled to hear that the other night in the Crater area. We were down in, I think, Wakefield, where we learned of that. So thank you for your outstanding work. Continue to do well. Continue to do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.